The Parashah Jayei Sarah. Curiously, it's not about life, but about death. And yet, it's one of the most vital sections in the entire Torah. Its name literally means the lives of Sarah, in the plural, in case you didn't notice. But its first line announces her departure. This apparent contradiction is the starting point for a profound reflection. When does a life truly end? With death, or with the legacy it leaves behind? Here we see Abraham facing grief, but also making momentous decisions. He buys a piece of land in Hebron, the cave of Machpelah, insisting on paying the full price. That act, which might seem merely administrative, is actually a gesture of faith. The divine promise begins to materialize with a deed of ownership. Abraham doesn't wait for miracles. He acts, because faith without action is only hope without roots. Then the narrative shifts in tone. The old patriarch seeks a wife for his son Isaac, and the faithful servant Eliezer departs for the north. There, at a well, a young woman named Rebekah offers water not only to the traveler, but also to his camels. In this everyday act of hospitality, the text sees a divine sign, human kindness as a reflection of heavenly providence. Isaac and Rebekah meet. They love each other, and love becomes comfort, continuity, a renewed promise. Finally, Abraham's life cycle comes to a close. He dies old and full of days and is buried next to Sarah. Isaac and Ishmael, the brothers separated by history, reunite to bury him. In this final familial gesture, the Torah teaches us that even divergent paths can converge again in the memory of the righteous. Chayei Sarah is not an elegy, but an affirmation that the life of the righteous continues beyond death, in the land they founded, in the children they raised, and in the promises they kept alive. Because in the end, to live is not to endure, it is to leave a mark. The Parashah Jayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, greets us with a paradox. It bears the name of life, yet opens with death. Sarah, the first matriarch of the people of Israel, dies at the age of 127 in Hebron, and her passing becomes the turning point in a story that speaks not only of individuals, but of legacy. Abraham, faced with the most human of sorrows, does not falter. He rises, negotiates, buys the cave of Machpelah, and pays its full price. On the surface, it is a simple legal transaction. In reality, it is a foundational act. It is the first piece of land that Israel legitimately possesses in Canaan. A small space, but with immense significance. Faith becomes tangible. The divine promise is transformed into human property. The narrative is recounted with almost notarial precision. Every word seems like a contract, every phrase a clause. The Torah emphasizes the witnesses, the payment, the public agreement. Why such detail? Because the divine promise does not absolve one of human responsibility. Abraham understands that spirituality is not measured by visions, but by actions. He doesn't wait for heaven to hand him the land. He takes the first step himself. Thus begins one of the most profound lessons in the entire Torah. Authentic faith is not expressed with words or prayers, but with concrete actions that transform history. The cave of Machpelah is not just a tomb. It is the first root of a people, the symbol of a promise that begins to be fulfilled not in the future, but in the present. In this second scene of the Parashah Jayei Sarah, the narrative shifts from mourning to hope. Abraham, aged but lucid, understands that the divine promise can only continue if life continues. Therefore, he entrusts his servant, Eliezer of Damascus, his most faithful administrator, with a crucial mission: to find a wife for Isaac. Not just any woman, but someone capable of sharing the spiritual vision of the covenant. The command is clear. He will not take a wife from among the Canaanites, but from Abraham's family, in Aram Naharaim. This is not an ethnic matter, but a spiritual one. The patriarch seeks to preserve a moral heritage, not pure blood. In this gesture, the entire history of Israel is foreshadowed, a people defined not by territory, but by purpose. Eliezer departs, and upon arriving, does something that elevates him above a mere messenger. He prays. He asks for a specific sign, but not a magical one. He asks that the chosen woman be recognized by her kindness, by her capacity to give without being asked. And then Rebekah, Rivka, appears. She doesn't ask questions. She doesn't hesitate. She offers water to the traveler, and also to his camels. In a single act of hospitality, she reveals her greatness. The Torah doesn't present her as an exotic beauty or an adorned princess, but as a woman of action, swift, generous, decisive. When marriage is proposed to her, she answers without hesitation, "I will go." It is her choice, her faith, her destiny. The encounter between Isaac and Rebekah is one of the most intimate moments in all of Scripture. There are no speeches, no miracles, only a brief and powerful phrase. Isaac loved her, and he was comforted after his mother's death. That love is not just human affection, it is spiritual continuity. The house that had been darkened by Sarah's death is once again filled with light. The promise is reborn, the lineage continues. Life, once again, triumphs over loss. Because in the Torah, love, when it is born from the soul and from faith, does not replace what was lost, it transforms it. The Torah closes the story of Abraham with a serenity that only fulfilled endings possess. After burying Sarah and securing Isaac's future, the patriarch remarries. His new wife, Keturah, bears him 6 sons: Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. The text doesn't dwell on sentimental details. It focuses on a symbolic gesture. Abraham gives these sons gifts and sends them eastward. He doesn't reject them, he blesses them, but he separates them. It is an act of spiritual discernment. The divine covenant continues exclusively with Isaac. Here the Torah displays profound wisdom. Not all blessings are equal, nor are all destinies identical. Each son receives his own path, but only one carries the promise. Not out of favoritism, but by mission. The choice of Isaac doesn't imply disregard for the others, but rather the preservation of a purpose. Finally, the moment of closure arrives. Abraham died at 175, and Scripture summarizes his life with a phrase no modern epitaph could match. He died old and full of days. It doesn't say rich, nor famous, nor triumphant. It says full of days. That is, satisfied, complete, without any debts owed to his destiny. His life, woven with trials, faith, and love, closes in fullness. At his burial, something silently miraculous occurs. Isaac and Ishmael are reunited. 2 brothers separated by history, reconciled to honor their father. In that act, Abraham's death becomes a symbol of unity and redemption. Sometimes, the peace that cannot be achieved in life is attained in the final act of farewell. And the narrative, true to its balance, does not forget Ishmael. His 12 sons, princes of nations, are listed, fulfilling another divine promise, that he too would be a great nation. The Torah thus closes the cycle with poetic justice. Even the unchosen path is blessed. Even those who walk outside the covenant have their place in God's plan. Abraham's life ends, but his echo remains. His faith becomes an inheritance. His example a seed. In Chayei Sarah, death is not an end. It is the point where the promise truly begins to be fulfilled. The Parashah Jayei Sarah opens with a silence laden with meaning, the death of a matriarch, narrated under a title that celebrates life. And it is precisely this apparent contradiction that captivated the mystical sages. For the Kabbalistic tradition, this text is not merely a genealogical account or a chronicle of family events. It is a mirror of the soul and its journey through time. The Zohar teaches that the death of a righteous person does not mark an end, but rather a continuation on another plane of existence. The soul does not cease, it is transformed. And here, in the figure of Sarah, that transformation becomes visible. Her life continues through Isaac, Rebekah, and the lineage that perpetuates her spiritual mission. That is why the Torah does not simply say Sarah died, but rather the years of Sarah's life, Vayihiu Chayei Sarah, as if even time itself obeyed her inner vitality. The Sha'ar ha-Gilgulim, a work attributed to the Arizal, describes human existence as a cycle of ascents and returns of the soul, called gilgul, literally to roll or to circulate in Hebrew. According to this doctrine, souls return to earth not as punishment, but out of love, to complete what was left unfinished, to repair tikkun, the fragments of the soul that did not reach perfection. In this context, Sarah's death and the union of Isaac and Rebekah represent a transfer of spiritual mission. What ends in one body begins in another. The cave of Machpelah, acquired by Abraham, is not merely a tomb. It is a symbol of the dual nature of humankind, the earthly and the spiritual. Machpelah means double, and Kabbalists see in this an allusion to the correspondence between body and soul, between matter and its higher reflection. Burying Sarah there affirms that her soul rests in a parallel dimension, that it does not disappear, but rather withdraws to be reborn. Similarly, the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah represents the renewal of Sarah's spark, a return of her spiritual energy in a new form. Rebekah inherits not only the matriarch's position, but also the light of prophecy and the inner strength of her predecessor. The Midrash states that when Rebekah entered Sarah's tent, the light shone again. In Kabbalistic language, this expresses that the very root of the soul manifested anew. Abraham, in his final years, sees this continuity and dies in peace, full of days. His soul unites with Sarah's in the cave of the patriarchs, a place where, according to the Zohar, righteous souls rest in communion before their return. Even the mention of Ishmael and his descendants takes on a mystical meaning here. The multiplicity of his children reflects the expansion of divine sparks in the world, each destined for its own rectification. From a contemporary perspective, this Kabbalistic approach offers a profoundly human and spiritual vision. Death is not a rupture, but a transformation. Each generation is a distinct expression of the same life force that began with Abraham and Sarah. Identity is not dissolved, it is renewed. And so Chayei Sarah does not speak of the end of a life, but of the mystery of its permanence, the certainty that the soul, like the divine promise, always finds a way to return. In the Kabbalistic reading of Chayei Sarah, each episode of the story becomes a symbol of the soul's journey, its rootedness in matter, and its ascent to more subtle plans. What the Torah presents as historical events, a purchase, a marriage, a death, Kabbalah reveals as a map of the soul's journey. The cave of Machpelah, acquired by Abraham to bury Sarah, is not merely a family property. It is a spiritual anchor. Tradition teaches that this place connects the physical and spiritual worlds. The term Machpelah, from the Hebrew root kafal, meaning to bend or to fold, alludes to a dual dimension, the visible and the invisible, the body and the soul. Kabbalists explain that there the four elements, fire, air, water, and earth, remain united even after death, a sign that Sarah's soul did not dissolve, but maintained a vibrant continuity between both worlds. From this perspective, the body is not a prison for the soul, but its anchor point, the place where the spiritual becomes tangible. The cave acts as a portal, a space where the souls of the patriarchs and matriarchs rest but also radiate their presence to those who still live. Reincarnation, then, is understood as the return of that spiritual energy to the material plane, a new opportunity for rectification, tikkun, to complete what was left unfinished. In this same sense, Abraham's decision to find a wife for Isaac among his relatives has a mystical dimension. It is not simply about preserving a bloodline, but about ensuring the continuity of the spiritual lineage. In the language of the Zohar, each generation is a vessel that contains the light of the previous one. Rebekah not only enters the family, she embodies, in part, the spark of Sarah's soul. She is the thread of gilgul, the return of the same spiritual root in a new human form. When Rebekah enters Sarah's tent and the lamp burns again, the Midrash speaks not of magic, but of a transference of consciousness. The flame is not new. It is the same soul that never died, rekindled in another body, in another mission. This spiritual continuity is the principle that underpins the entire doctrine of gilgul ha-neshamot. Souls do not die, they are transformed and return to continue weaving the divine purpose. Even the genealogy of Ishmael, with his 12 princes, participates in this weaving. Kabbalah teaches that the side branches also have their function in the spiritual economy of the world. Souls that are not part of the main line of the covenant possess their own cycle of rectification. Each returns according to its measure and its tikkun. Nothing is lost in the divine universe. Everything that emanates must return to its source. The narrative culminates with the death of Abraham, described as old and full of days. On the mystical level, this phrase does not designate biological old age, but rather the fullness of the soul that has completed its purpose. A satisfied soul does not need to return. It has integrated all the dimensions of its mission. But if any spark remained unlit, it will gently return, no longer as a debt, but as an expansion. Thus, the Parashah Jayei Sarah becomes a veiled treatise on the immortality of the soul. It teaches us that dying is not disappearing, but crossing the threshold into another form of presence, that loving, teaching, and procreating are modes of spiritual perpetuation, and that each life, far from being an isolated episode, is another page in the eternal book of the soul. We're halfway through this lesson, and we're taking a short break just to remind you that if you'd like to make a donation to help us with this free Mishna course project, you can do so by scanning the QR code on the screen. We also have a donation link in the description. We'd also like to remind you that it helps us a lot if you subscribe to this channel, give us a like, and share this information with anyone who might be interested. Thank you so much. The term gilgul neshamot, the rolling of souls, occupies a unique place in Jewish tradition. It is not part of the obligatory creed, but it has permeated Kabbalistic spirituality for centuries. It brings together theology, mystical psychology, and the poetry of the soul. In its technical sense, gilgul designates the reincarnation of a soul that returns to the physical world to complete a task, a mitzvah, or an outstanding rectification. It is not a punishment, but an opportunity. According to Kabbalah, the soul moves in cycles of perfection, tikkun, like a spiral that advances each time it returns to matter. Alongside this concept is iber, impregnation, when a righteous soul temporarily unites with that of a living person to assist them in a sacred duty. Unlike the dibik, which represents an adverse possession, iber is a luminous cooperation, an alliance between souls. The doctrine of gilgul does not originate in the Talmud, nor is it among Maimonides' 13 tenets of faith. In fact, thinkers like Saadia Gaon firmly rejected it, considering it a foreign import alien to biblical monotheism. But in the Middle Ages, mystical circles readily incorporated it. The Sefer HaBahir, the Zohar, and above all, Rabbi Chaim Vittel's Sha'ar HaGilgulim, a compendium of the Ari's Isaac Luria's teachings, consolidated it as one of the great metaphysical structures of esoteric Judaism. In this view, the human soul is not a single entity, but a hierarchy of levels, nefesh, ruach, neshama, and on higher planes, chaya and yachidah. Each can be reincarnated in a different way, or even coexist in another person through ibur. Thus, a tzaddik can share his inner strength with a disciple, or a fragmented soul can descend several times until its repair is complete. The ultimate goal is always tikkun, to correct what is incomplete, to purify what is dark, to raise the sparks of holiness that remained trapped in matter. From this perspective, the sufferings of a lifetime can be interpreted as the effects of previous spiritual debts, and merits as the achievements of a process that transcends individual biography. Kabbalah sees no contradiction between gilgul and the resurrection of the dead. For Kabbalists, reincarnation is the soul's temporal journey, resurrection its eternal destiny. At the end of the cycles, the perfected soul will return to its original body in the Messianic age. Historically, the idea has had both detractors and passionate defenders. Saadia Gaon considered it incompatible with divine justice. Centuries later, Gershom Scholem and Moshe Idel situated it within the internal development of Jewish mysticism, nourished by Neoplatonic currents but transformed into its own distinct system. In religious practice, the concept left its mark. Prayers for the dead, Kaddish, Yizkor, pilgrimages to the tombs of the tzaddikim, and Hasidic stories about returning souls do not literally prove reincarnation, but they reflect the conviction that the life of the soul continues. Finally, all Kabbalistic reading requires operating at the level of Sod, the secret. It does not seek rational proof, but rather to reveal hidden meanings within the text. Thus, when Kabbalists read in the Parashah Chayei Sarah that the years of Sarah's life were 127, they do not take it as a biographical figure, but as a key. Each life is a cycle of refinement, each death a transition. Ultimately, the gilgul offers a spiritual answer to the mystery of existence, that the human soul is not born only once, nor dies only once, but travels through time as an eternal pilgrim until every spark of light has returned to its source. In Judaism, reincarnation, gilgul ha-neshamot, the rolling of souls, is not a universal dogma, nor is it among Maimonides' 13 principles. It divides sages into two schools of thought: the rationalists, Saadia Gaon, Maimonides, Ibn Ezra, who reject it for theological and logical reasons, and the Kabbalistic mystics, Zohar, Arizal, Chaim Vital, Ramchal, who defend it as an explanation for suffering, divine justice, and the rectification, tikkun, of the soul. According to Kabbalah, a soul can be reincarnated in another body, and in rare cases, in other forms, to fulfill mitzvot, atone for transgressions, or help others. Two related concepts are also associated with this doctrine: ibor, impregnation, the temporary fusion of a righteous soul with a living being, and dibuk, negative possession. The earliest sources appear in the Sefer HaBahir, 12th century, which teaches that human inequality is a response to the soul's process of correction. Their soul has returned to correct itself. Section 195. The Zohar, 13th century, expands on this. All souls must be reincarnated until they are completely perfected. Zohar 2, 99b, 3, 216b, highlighting three ideas: cosmic justice, divine mercy, and spiritual continuity between generations. The systematic formulation arrives with Rabbi Chaim Vital in the Shar ha-Gilgulim, 16th century, where he compiles the teachings of the Arizal. All the souls of Israel must be reincarnated until they fulfill the 613 commandments, chapter 2. Texts such as Ecclesiastes 1:4, one generation goes and another comes, are interpreted as the return of the same souls. Cordovero, Pardes Rimonum, and Ramphal, Deresh Hashem, explain that each soul returns according to its spiritual level, while Hasidism, Baal Shem Tov, Tanya 37:38, emphasizes the mission of raising sparks of holiness. The doctrine is based on the structure of the soul: nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechidah, whose levels can be reincarnated or coexist through Iber. Lurianic texts describe multiple returns until the completion of tikkun, without specifying a number of cycles or normative rules. Its ethical and theological foundations rest on divine justice, Exodus 34:7, understood as the continuity of souls, not hereditary punishment. Mercy, Job 33:29-30, where God grants second chances. Spiritual unity of Israel, Deuteronomy 25:5, continuity of the spiritual lineage. Universal tikkun, Ecclesiastes 1:9, the cycles of the soul repeat what must be repaired. Rationalists object that gilgul dilutes individual responsibility. Kabbalists respond that reincarnation and resurrection are not opposed. The former is pedagogical, the latter eschatological. In the end, the perfected soul will return to its original body. In short, gilgul offers a theological framework of justice and hope. All suffering can be redeemed. No spark of good is lost, and each life is a new opportunity for rectification. But the rationalist reminder persists. Holiness is not postponed. It is chosen today, here, in this life. To understand the classic objections to reincarnation in Judaism, it is helpful to first listen to its most influential opponents. Saadia Gaon in Emunot Vedeot, the 6th 8, states it unambiguously. Some believe that the soul is transferred from one body to another. Such words do not belong to our tradition and are meaningless. Behind this statement lie three pillars. Logical injustice. If the soul does not remember previous lives, it cannot be held responsible for them. The contradiction with resurrection. If a soul occupied several bodies, which one will be resurrected? And the biblical absence of an explicit statement about gilgul in the Torah and the prophets. Maimonides follows a path consistent with his system. He does not accept reincarnation. He builds eschatology on judgment and reward after death. And he enshrines among his 13 principles of faith resurrection, not gilgul. For him, the individual soul is created with the body. Retribution is personal and definitive, and adding physical returns dilutes the moral responsibility of this life. Other rationalists share this view. Ibn Ezra, who can allude to pre-existence without accepting a literal gilgul. Rabbi Yosef Albo, who centers his creed on resurrection, and various Babylonian Gaons, who deny any Talmudic basis for the concept and suggest external Neoplatonic influences. The theological and logical arguments are clearly ordered. Each soul is unique and unrepeatable, created at birth, as Genesis 2:7 teaches, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Judgment is individual and immediate after death, according to Ecclesiastes 12:7. The dust returns to the earth, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Eschatological hope rests on a single life and a single body that will awaken in the end times, as Daniel 12:2 states. And moral responsibility admits no shortcuts. Deuteronomy 24:16 establishes that each person will die for their own sin, so appealing to previous cycles could relativize present merit and guilt. The contrast with Kabbalistic mysticism allows for a clear comparative synthesis. For Kabbalists, the soul pre-exists and can circulate in cycles of tikkun. For rationalists, it is created once by God and does not return. In the mystical view, the reason for return is spiritual rectification. In the philosophical one, it is unnecessary because judgment occurs at the end of this life. The former read the Zohar, Bahir, and Sha'ar HaGilgulim as foundational texts and interpret passages such as Ecclesiastes 1:4 or Job 33:29-30 in terms of return. The latter group relies on emunot vedeot and the Guide for the Perplexed, privileging Genesis 2:7, Ecclesiastes 12:7, and Deuteronomy 24:16, and maintains that moral purpose is fully determined here and now. Regarding resurrection, Kabbalah presents it as complementary to the soul's journey. At the end of the cycles, the return to the final body, while rationalism understands it as unique and sufficient, incompatible with previous transmigrations. In short, the classic objection to gilgul is not an anti-Kabbalistic gesture, but a defense of immediate justice, the oneness of the soul, and the coherence of eschatological hope in a single life that counts for all. In short, reincarnation in Judaism, ha-neshamot, is not a dogma of faith, but rather an esoteric doctrine developed within the Kabbalistic framework. Rationalist philosophers, from Saadia Gaon to Maimonides and Yosef Albo, rejected it as incompatible with the oneness of the soul, the moral responsibility of each life, and the doctrine of the final resurrection. In contrast, mystics, from the Zohar to the Arizal and Ramchal, conceived of it as a manifestation of divine justice and mercy, a mechanism through which the soul receives new opportunities to complete its tikkun and attain spiritual perfection. Over time, Hasidic Kabbalah transferred this idea from the speculative to the devotional realm. Prayers for the deceased, pilgrimages to the tombs of tzaddikim, meditations on the elevation of souls, and the notion of sparks that must be redeemed. Thus, gilgul ceased to be a concept reserved for initiates and became a living metaphor for continuity, rectification, and hope, an expression of a profound conviction that no divine spark is ever lost and that the human soul, even after its departure, remains an active part of God's eternal plan. That's all for today's lesson. See you in the next video.